She used her last strength to save a dying wolf cub, not knowing the creature in her arms was the heir to a throne, and that the moment her blood touched the frozen earth, a king would come running, drawn not just to his son, but to her. They called Ira Thorn the Hollow, a name spoken with the kind of quiet cruelty that didn't need shouting to wound. In the Ironclaw pack, worth was measured in power, in the strength of your shift, in the violence of your wolf, and Ira had none. 19 winters had passed, and not once had her bones cracked beneath a full moon. Not once had her voice joined the wild chorus that echoed through the mountains. So they locked her away when the others transformed, not out of fear, but out of disgust, as if her stillness might infect them. The cage they kept her in was small, rusted, and smelled of damp straw and old blood, tucked behind the training grounds where the pack's strongest fought and howled and proved their dominance. Ira learned early that silence was survival. Words invited attention. Attention invited pain. And pain was something the Ironclaw pack delivered generously. Alpha Darius believed weakness was a stain that had to be scrubbed out, and since Ira could not be made strong, she was instead made useful. She cleaned their kill rooms with bare hands, scrubbed blood from stone floors until her fingers split open, carried water until her shoulders burned, and still it was never enough. The other wolves treated her like something less than human, less than prey, something inconvenient that simply hadn't died yet. The Luna once told her, almost kindly, that some creatures were born without purpose, and perhaps Ira's purpose was simply to endure until she faded. Ira had nodded then, not because she believed it, but because believing didn't change anything. Enduring did, and she endured everything. The hunger that clawed at her ribs, the cold that seeped into her bones, the bruises layered so thick across her skin they never fully healed. But what she could not endure, what always carved something sharp and aching inside her chest, was the sound of the pack on full moon nights. The howls, the unity, the belonging. It was beautiful, and beauty, when you are denied it completely, becomes its own kind of cruelty. On the night everything changed, the cold was worse than usual, the kind that burned your lungs with every breath. Ira had been sent into the forest long after dark, a punishment disguised as a task, ordered to gather firewood from beyond the usual boundary line where the Ironclaw wolves rarely ventured. The trees there grew older, taller, their branches tangled like skeletal fingers against the sky, and even the pack avoided going too deep, whispering that the land belonged to something older, something that did not tolerate trespassers. But Ira was not considered part of the pack in any way that mattered, so the rules did not protect her. They only pushed her further into danger. She moved slowly through the snow, her bare hands red and stiff as she gathered fallen branches, her breath visible in the freezing air, her thin cloak doing little to keep the cold at bay. That was when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. A sharp, broken whimper carried on the wind. Ira froze, her body going still in a way that had kept her alive for years. It came again, softer this time, trembling with pain. Not human, not fully animal either. Something in between. Something young. She should have ignored it. She should have turned back, finished her task, avoided whatever danger waited in the dark. That was what survival demanded. But the sound did something to her, slipped past all the walls she had built and wrapped itself around a place in her chest she had long believed empty. Before she realized what she was doing, she was moving toward it, deeper into the forest, her steps quick despite the biting cold. The trees thickened, the silence growing heavier, until she found the source. A small wolf cub lay half buried in the snow, its dark fur matted with blood, its tiny body trembling violently. Its front leg was caught in a cruel iron trap, the jagged teeth clamped deep into its flesh. Blood pooled beneath it, stark against the white snow. Its eyes, bright, amber, terrified, snapped toward her as she approached, and it let out a weak snarl, more instinct than threat. Ira dropped to her knees beside it, the cold instantly seeping through her clothes, but she barely felt it. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "I won't hurt you." The cub didn't understand her words, but something in her tone must have reached it, because its struggling slowed, its body still shaking as it watched her. The trap was old, rusted, but that only made it harder to open. Ira placed her hands on the metal jaws, ignoring the way the cold bit into her skin, and pushed. The trap didn't budge. She tried again, harder this time, her muscles straining, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The metal groaned but held firm. The cub whimpered, the sound cutting through her like a blade. Almost, she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring the cub or herself. She repositioned her grip, her fingers slipping against the blood-slick metal, and forced every ounce of strength she had left into one final push. Something in her shoulder gave a painful pop, but she didn't stop. With a harsh screech of rusted iron, the trap finally snapped open. The cub yanked its leg free and collapsed against her, too weak to move, its small body pressing into her chest. For a moment, Ira just held it, her arms wrapping around it instinctively, shielding it from the cold, from the world, from everything that had ever hurt it. She pulled her tattered cloak around the cub, trying to trap what little warmth remained between them. That was when the trap sprang again. She didn't even have time to react. The iron jaws slammed shut, this time catching her side. Pain exploded through her, sharp and blinding, stealing the air from her lungs. She gasped, her body jerking, but she didn't let go of the cub, not even for a second. Warmth spread rapidly beneath her, soaking into her clothes, dripping into the snow. She knew what it meant. She had seen enough blood in her life to recognize when there was too much of it. The forest seemed to tilt around her, the trees blurring as her vision swam. Still, she tightened her grip on the cub, pressing it closer to her chest, her chin resting lightly against its head. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "You're okay." The cub let out a soft whine, nuzzling against her as if it understood, as if it knew she was the only thing standing between it and death. Ira's body felt heavy, her limbs growing numb as the cold and blood loss took their toll. The snow beneath her was no longer cold. It was warm, and that terrified her more than anything. Her eyes fluttered, struggling to stay open. Somewhere deep in the forest, a howl rose, loud, powerful, filled with a fury so immense it seemed to shake the air itself. It wasn't like the howl she had heard from Ironclaw. This was something deeper, older, a sound that carried authority, command, and something dangerously close to fear. It was coming closer. Ira didn't understand what it meant. She didn't know that the cub in her arms was the son of a king. She didn't know that her blood, spilling onto sacred ground, was awakening something that had slept within her all her life. She only knew that the small, trembling life she held had trusted her, and that was enough. Her vision darkened at the edges, the world narrowing to the steady rhythm of the cub's heartbeat against her chest. "It's okay," she whispered one last time, though she could no longer feel her lips forming the words. And as the darkness finally closed in, the last thing she heard was the thunder of something massive tearing through the forest toward her, the sound of a king who had found her, just before she slipped away. King Cale Varen had never known fear, not in battle, not in loss, not even when death stood at his door. But the moment his son's scent vanished into the frozen night, something inside him broke. The bond to his heir didn't just weaken, it fractured, replaced by the unmistakable trace of blood. He didn't hesitate. He shifted mid-run, his body snapping into the form of a massive shadow wolf, and tore through the forest with a speed that bent the silence around him. Every instinct screamed one thing: his son was dying. The trail led him beyond his borders, into the forbidden stretch of forest where the air grew heavy and ancient, where even powerful wolves stepped carefully. And then he smelled it: blood, thick and overwhelming. Not just his son's, the others, spilled freely into the sacred ground. Cale burst through the tree-line and stopped dead. A girl lay collapsed in the snow, her body small, broken, soaked in red. And in her arms, his son, alive, trembling, but alive, pressed tightly against her chest, as if she had shielded him with the last of her strength. For a moment, Cale didn't move. This human, this fragile, wolfless girl, had done what trained warriors might have failed to do. She had saved the future of his kingdom. He shifted back to human form slowly, stepping toward them with measured caution. The cub stirred at his presence, letting out a weak whine, but instead of going to him, it clung tighter to the girl, nuzzling into her as if she were the only safety it trusted. That alone told Cale everything. She hadn't just rescued him. She had protected him, earned him. Cale crouched beside them, his eyes scanning her injuries. The wound at her side was deep, too deep, Blood still seeped steadily into the snow, and beneath it, older scars marked her skin, burns, bruises, the silent evidence of a life filled with cruelty. Someone had already been killing her long before tonight. Carefully, he reached forward and lifted his son from her arms. The reaction was immediate. The cub cried out, panicked, thrashing weakly, tried to crawl back toward her, its small body refusing to let her go. Cale stilled, watching the desperation in his child, then glanced back at the girl. She hadn't moved. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. Relief hit him sharper than he expected. She was still alive. Barely. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that mattered more than it should have. The ground beneath her was soaked with blood, and for a brief second, Cale felt something shift in the air, subtle, ancient, like the forest itself had noticed her sacrifice. But there was no time to understand it. He made his decision in silence. Cale gathered both of them, his son against his chest, the girl cradled carefully in his arms. She was too light, her body cold, her breathing shallow. Yet the moment she was close again, the cub calmed slightly, pressing against her even in unconsciousness, as if her presence alone kept him safe. Cale didn't miss that. "You'll live," he said quietly, more command than hope. Then he turned and ran. By the time he reached his kingdom, the gates were already opening, guards rushing forward in alarm. They froze at the sight, their king carrying a bleeding human girl along with the injured prince. Questions rose, but one look at Cale's face silenced them all. "Save them," he ordered, his voice cold and absolute. The healers moved instantly. The cub was taken first, crying and resisting, reaching back toward the girl as he was carried away. And then they took her. Her body disappeared behind curtains, hands working quickly, voices low and urgent as they fought to stop the bleeding that should have already ended her life. Cale remained where he was. He didn't move, didn't sit, didn't speak. He simply stood outside, his gaze fixed on the place where she lay, as if leaving would somehow change the outcome. He told himself it was because she had saved his son, because he owed her a debt no king could ignore. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the only reason. There was something about her, something wrong, and something powerful. Something in her scent, in her blood, in the way even the sacred forest had seemed to respond to her presence. And as the hours passed, as the healers fought to keep her alive, Cale Varen realized one thing with quiet certainty. The girl they had left to die in the snow was not ordinary. And if she survived, she would change everything. She was supposed to die that night, but Ira Thorne had never followed the path others chose for her. When she opened her eyes, it wasn't to chains or cold, but to warmth she didn't trust. For a long moment, she stayed still, waiting for it to disappear. It didn't. Instead, she felt something small pressed against her side. She turned and found the wolf cub alive, curled into her as if he belonged there. Relief hit her quietly, deeper than words. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice barely there. The cub lifted its head, nuzzling closer, choosing her all over again. The door opened, and the air shifted. King Cale Varen stepped inside, his presence filling the room without effort. His gaze fixed on her, sharp, searching. "You should be dead," he said. Ira gave a faint breath. "I tried not to be." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite softness, but close. He stepped nearer, his eyes briefly falling to his son before returning to her. "You saved him." Ira didn't look away from the cub. He needed help. Simple. Honest. Enough. Cale studied her in silence, something deeper than curiosity settling in his gaze. "Do you know why you survived?" he asked. She shook her head. His voice lowered. "Because something in you refused to stay buried." Before she could respond, it started, a warmth in her chest, unfamiliar and growing. Not pain, not fear, something stronger. Her breath caught as the feeling spread, filling the emptiness she had carried her entire life. The cub stirred, reacting instantly, pressing closer. Cale didn't move. He felt it too. Whatever had been sleeping inside her was waking. Ira's fingers tightened slightly as the warmth became power, steady, alive, hers. For the first time, she didn't feel hollow. She felt whole. When she looked up at Cale, there was no fear left in her eyes, only realization. He held her gaze, certain now. "You were never weak," he said quietly. "You were waiting." Outside, a distant howl rose, and this time, she felt it.